Welcome to another episode of Suturing Time. And today we are going to continue on with our discussion of synchronicity. We wanted to continue with the show format where we watch a video or two and then Phil and I discuss the video. So we will put a link to the videos in the show notes down below. And this week, what we're discussing is a guest on a podcast channel called The Future Thinkers, and the guest was Dr. Kirby Surprise. And we're actually going to be discussing content from two videos that they had with him. One was called The Science of Synchronicity, and one was called Ayahuasca and Synchronicity. But after watching the two videos, Phil and I discussed, we thought it was important to put some information out there, which we found concerning in the second video called Ayahuasca and Synchronicity. So I'm going to be reading a few direct quotes from Dr. Kirby from that video, and it'll be the second video down below called Ayahuasca and Synchronicity, Dr. Kirby Surprise. And if you want to listen to the comments from him himself, the comments start at the 13-minute mark in that video. So we felt it was important to put this information out there first before we discuss the rest of the content from that show, in case a person wanted to use the information that we're going to put forward here to kind of frame how they want to view his information that he put forward. So basically, he was talking about ayahuasca in his video, and the host asked him about his thoughts on microdosing, and he went on to say that he does microdose ayahuasca. And so I'll give you some direct quotes, but it was when he was discussing this is what we found concerning. So I'm going to read the first quote that we found concerning, and then I'll discuss why I think it's concerning. So when he was talking about the ayahuasca, he said, and this is quote, "The liquid version you can take every day. It's hard to tolerate, but there's nothing toxic about it. The LD50 on ayahuasca, the typical liquid dose is about 25 milliliters. The LD50 is 7 liters, 7,000 cc's. And at that point, the water shuts down your kidneys. So there's zero toxicity." So, I found that, I guess as a pharmacist, I found that very concerning, because he's stating that ayahuasca is non-toxic. And I'm going to read it one more time just because the wording of it is important. The next quote is very long, so I won't read that twice, I promise you. But I just want to read it one more time. "The liquid version you can take every day. It's hard to tolerate, but there's nothing toxic about it. The LD50 on ayahuasca, the typical liquid dose is about 25 milliliters. The LD50 is 7 liters, 7,000 cc's. And at that point, the water shuts down your kidneys. So there's zero toxicity." So I wanted to kind of break down that statement. And I think the first way to do that is to talk about this term that he uses called LD50. And basically what LD50 is it's lethal dose 50. It's the amount of substance that if you took it all at once, it would cause the death of half the people that took that amount, and it would cause that death in a short period of time. So it's meant, to measure how acutely toxic a substance is. It's not a good measure of long-term or cumulative toxicity. And Phil was quick to point that out when we were discussing it after we listened to it. He's like, just because something isn't, doesn't make you die from it right away doesn't mean that it couldn't have cumulative toxicity. And I'm like, that's absolutely correct. And we felt we need to kind of bring forward some of these statements because we'll go through quite a bit here, but a lot of it is very concerning. So this statement of his, to me, would be akin to saying something to the effect of, well, because the speed that you would have to be driving a car at into a tree to kill half the people who hit the tree, let's say that's 60 miles an hour, then therefore it's not dangerous to drive the car into a tree at 25 miles an hour. That's basically how that statement can be interpreted. And I think that's very dangerous. Another, I guess, analogy would be, well, we could compare the LD50 to some other known toxic substance that you definitely would not want to take every day. So let's say Roundup, the used for crops, it's been shown in a court of law to cause lymphoma when you're exposed to it over periods of time. So the LD50 of Roundup is half a pound. He said the LD50 of the liquid ayahuasca is 7 liters. Um, so basically, if you kind of look at it the same way, under his logic, um, you would be fine to take a half a teaspoon a day of Roundup. In under his wording, there's nothing. He would say there's nothing toxic about it. Well, we know that's not the case. And then one other thing, so like the wording that he uses in there is very important, because in his statement that I read, he says it's hard to tolerate, but there's nothing toxic about it. Now, I think it's important that he doesn't clarify what he means by hard to tolerate. Usually when something's hard to tolerate, it's your body's way of trying to tell you that it's bad for you. For example, if you take something and you vomit, that's your body's way of trying to get rid of it. It knows it doesn't belong there, and it's trying to get it out of your system. And I think, that to somebody with a doctorate degree that treats patients, that should be fairly obvious. So that was the first statement that I wanted to address, the first quote from his video. So any thoughts on that, Phil? I mean, did I explain that okay? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, Brock. And I just want to say that I started to feel a compulsion to produce this show. I'm information professional with several degrees from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I would be in a position where, working as a librarian, I might be giving important information to someone. And they would, at least to an extent, trust me based on education, credential, experience, and maybe even professional license. And so I wonder about these rather outlandish claims, which he's backing up with his PhD in a field that he's not working in.
Right.
That's a big. I've seen that so many times, especially on both the left and the right, when somebody who's not in a particular field makes a qualification as if it was the field that they were in.
Right.
And yeah, I'm feeling that this is a first. Maybe we'll do some other programs like this, and that's about as much as I have to say right now.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I mean, I have a doctorate degree in pharmacy, but I wouldn't go around and trying to diagnose a mental illness. Um, so I think that's kind of it's basically the corollary of what he's doing here. So should we go on to like the second claim that he made?
Yeah, let's do that.
So the second concerning statement that he made was about what he believes to be anti-aging properties of ayahuasca. So to kind of set it up, when he was asked about his thoughts on microdosing ayahuasca, he said, with ayahuasca, it works quite well. I take a small amount of it every day. He said, mostly what I do is DMT minimal. I use the first plant, the vine. I get the harmine out of the northern version, which is the Syrian root seeds. I refine it myself. And what I do is I do it before I go to sleep. And then he goes on and talks about why he believes that this is good for your brain and brain processing and yada, yada, yada. So he's basically saying that he grinds these seeds up at home and takes it himself before bedtime. So, and then when he was further discussing this and questioned by the host, he stated, and then this is so bear with me here. It's long, but I just wanted to read it exactly. You guys can go to that second video. Like I said, start at about 13 minutes in and just continuously play, and you'll get to this point here. And it is a bit long, but I just want to read it exactly, like do my best to try to read it exactly the way that he said it. He said, the other strange effect it has is the Syrian root, the harmine. I seem to be aging slower. You know, I'm almost 60, and physically I think I am like 43 or 44. When I stop taking it, my hair starts going gray, and when I go back to taking it, my hair colors again. And I think what's happening is the harmine does it. The MAOI in it keeps your natural serotonin, dopamine, and epinephrine from being wiped out between firings of your nerves, you know. Between neurons, there is a synaptic gap, which usually gets cleaned between each firing, which means that the body sends out chemicals that destroy those modulating neurotransmitters. When you do an MAOI, that is like in the vine or the seeds, it stops that from happening. The monoamine oxidase gets wiped out. So your natural levels of serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine stay high. And I think that increases the neurological efficiency of the brain considerably, including the brain's ability to regulate physiological responses and processes. There are legends about these ayahuasqueros all over South America who lived well past 100, and they're still pretty spry, and they all say it's because of this medicine. And I think what's happening is it's giving them enough neurotransmitters on board so the system can properly regulate itself instead of, you know, being depleted by stress and poor nutrition and all of that kind of stuff, end quote. So a lot of words there, not a whole lot of substance, and some very questionable things in my opinion. So I thought, Phil, as I was thinking about this, I thought of 3 different points that I wanted to address, and maybe we'll go through it one point at a time, and maybe I'll come back to you when you know, just to get your thoughts on it after I finish each point. So,
Sure.
point number one, it's interesting that he did not use any objective measures for his anti-aging claims. He just used anecdotal reports of centenarian ayahuasqueros, and that he thinks he's physically only the equivalent of 43 or 44 years old, even though he said he was almost 60. So my first question would be, does he have any data, you know, any before and after data to support any of these claims? Like, I mean, did he get measures of his telomere length? Did he get any measures of cardiac health? I mean, even something as simple as blood pressure, maybe a calcium scan of his heart. What about his skin turgor? You know, if as you get older, you know, if you pull on your skin, the older you get, the harder it takes to snap back. Well, you know, I mean, just there wasn't anything objective in any of his I guess evidence he's giving for his claim. Um, you know, feeling that he's physically 43 or 44. Well, I mean, I guess you can look at my picture and look at his picture and see if you know, he looks 3 years younger than me. And then maybe you can touch on this with me, Phil, but even the point of his anecdotal evidence of these ayahuasqueros living to be 100, the ayahuasqueros are the shamans these tribal shamans down in Central or South America that prepare this ayahuasca liquid for these ceremonies. And I'm not an expert in anthropology or anything like that, but you know, usually my understanding is that usually the shamans are kind of a privileged class, and they're not necessarily, you know, subjected to the grinds of life as much as the non-shamans. You know, they're not out there doing physically demanding labor. I guess another thing would be is they're not eating, you know, highly processed foods in the industrial, like we are in the industrial world, and you know, they're just not subjected to a lot of the modern stresses, which raises your cortisol levels and everything else. But I mean, these are all just purely anecdotal anyway. Anything to add on that as far as the ayahuasqueros or the subjectivity of the data, Phil?
Well, I think not, Brock. I think again, I have seen people in their hundreds, and the characterization is so antithetical to what I've seen that spry. I mean, I
Right.
don't know what it means to be spry. I mean, it means I just don't know. I'm uncomfortable with the term, and I'm a highly cognitive functioning 77-year old, and I'm mentally pretty spry. But I don't think it's if first of all, if there is in fact something like that, like these ayahuascaros that are living way into their hundreds, then I'd like to see some, and
Yeah,
I'd like to see
exactly.
a demographic study because I know that when my father was born in 1898 and died in 1985, his life expectancy at birth was 46 years. And we've had some remarkable increases in life expectancy even in the second half of the 20th century for the West. And I'd like to see that compared to certain to the you'd have to make a sample. You might be able to do a natural experiment if you got the data, but it's a claim which appears to be evidence based, and in fact, it's not at all.
Right. And so that's a very good point about just kind of how vague the word spry is, or how non-committal, just kind of general. And like he tries to throw around a lot of big words, to that may seem like big words for the layperson, but he's throwing a lot of words around, but there's not a lot of meaning there. So I just figured I'd jump back up to part of his statement because your point is very good. And so I'm trying to find, just trying to pick a part out here, just to kind of show how ridiculous it is. But he says, okay, so like here we go. So your natural levels of serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine stay high, and I think that increases the neurological efficiency of the brain considerably, including the brain's ability to regulate physiological responses and processes. Well, that's a lot of big words that say absolutely nothing. I mean, it's kind of impressive on some things to try to string a bunch of big words together that don't have much meaning. It's actually not that easy to do.
And
So
actually, if you look at him, he's using your naturally high levels. What he's really describing, he's making a claim that the substance which he advocates would give unnaturally high levels. Because I get the idea, what I'm getting the idea, and I'd have to go back to a psychology course I took fairly recently, that it's natural for the synapses to be sort of cleaned out. And he's saying that the effect would work on a cumulative and residual level, which it's not supposed to do.
right, yeah, and I will touch on that, on one of my points down. So yeah, that subjectivity thing and vague statements, that's point number one. Point number two is, and this goes along with the vague statements, but his neurotransmitter theory, I guess, neurotransmitter theory of anti-aging, we'll call it. To me, it's just ridiculous and it's intentionally vague. So he's just basically, as you were just describing, he's saying there's more of these transmitters in the synapses than would normally be there. They're not cleaned out as much because of the effects of these MAOI inhibitors in this route that he's breaking up that's in within the ayahuasca. And I will go into what the MAOI inhibitors are and the dangers of them in shortly. But basically his whole theory is ridiculous to anybody with any biochemical background or pharmacological training, or basic physiology. So basically, if what he's saying is true, then all antidepressants would have anti-aging properties. And we have a very large sample population of people taking antidepressants. We have tens of millions of them right here in the US. And so if antidepressants had anti-aging properties, it would quickly show up within data pools that people taking them were living longer, and that's certainly not the case. I mean, it's ridiculous on its face. And then the other thing is based on his theory, of these more neurotransmitters, serotonin, dopamine, and serotonin, norepinephrine, and epinephrine were the ones that he specifically claimed, not dopamine, I guess. Well, then under his theory, meth and bath salts should be the ultimate anti-aging cocktails based on his theory. And we've all seen pictures of burnt out meth users, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of also one, like, caution is he kind of ignoring that, when it comes to your human body and physiology and like basically anything, there's no free ride. So he kind of has this, he kind of oversimplifies this, tries to make it sound like, he throws a bunch of big words and then makes it sound like it's obvious, and it's rather banal. So and in this case, I think it's actually dangerous, because I guess I could touch briefly on these MIOI inhibitors. So basically in the show, he was discussing how, ayahuasca has this compound called DMT, which is the hallucinogenic one that, when the shamans use it, they get their visions or whatever. Mm-hmm. But he says it also has 4 different antidepressants, which are MAOI inhibitors. And basically, I'm not going to launch into a pharmacology, lesson at length, but basically there's an enzyme called monoamine oxidase, which breaks down these neurotransmitters. It demethylates them and just kind of clears them out, destroys them. Mm-hmm. And what these monoamine oxidase inhibitors do is they inhibit that enzyme. They prevent it from breaking down, the different neurotransmitters. And specifically the ones he's talking about are serotonin, norepinephrine, and epinephrine. Some people call it adrenaline or noradrenaline. So the problem is in over 2 decades of working as a pharmacist, I could count on one hand the number of times I saw these drugs used, and there's a reason for it. They have horrible side effects, potential side effects, but then they also have very scary drug interactions. He would have you believe that having more of the serotonin and this norepinephrine and everything around in these synapses is a good thing. Now, one thing that's important is, yes, like medically, that's what antidepressants do to a certain extent, but it's in a controlled manner. If you get too much serotonin in, laying around, that's in these synapses for extended periods of time, you can get, if you get too much serotonin in your system, you can get serotonin syndrome. And then this is a terrible adverse effect of these monoamine oxidase inhibitors. Basically, it can be anything from, mild like nausea and diarrhea, all the way to agitation, muscle rigidity, tremors, or even seizures. It's just a terrible thing that you always worry about. And then the other danger of it, I guess I'll go into next, is like drug interactions and food interactions. But does that kind of make sense what I've said, Phil? Just kind of like the basics of what these MAOI, monoamine oxidase inhibitors are, and kind of why his theory doesn't make any sense. Because to me, that his theory, then it would be whatever is the most potent at keeping these neurochemical or these neurotransmitters around, which would be like bath salts and meth, and I guess cocaine would, wouldn't be as strong as that. But I'd just be like, you'd have this spectrum of, more powerful makes you live longer, and I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think I'm fine. I'm fine with that. I'm not even going to talk about antidepressants because I have sort of a Time magazine understanding of them. But I will say that it seems to me that their use is restricted to certain demographics, or it used to be. I mean, you wouldn't want a 14-year-old to read the thing we're discussing and then try to make it on their own. There are reasons for that.
Right. And so what he's talking about is he claims these seeds, these ayahuasca seeds or roots or whatever he's talking about that he breaks down, has these 4 monoamine oxidase inhibitors that are actually like antidepressants, but they're natural versions. And I think one thing that's important for people to know is that these things, the reason that, I can count on one hand the number of times I've actually seen these used in practice. They're an absolute last resort for people with refractory depression, or other conditions that they have tried hard to treat with other things and they just cannot do it. And they're like a drug of last resort, basically, because they have such, because of side effects and because of severe drug interactions. And so because basically this doesn't, it prevents all these different neurotransmitters from being broken down. Any medication that increases the amount of these neurotransmitters interacts severely with this. So like all of your standard psychotropic medications, well, they all affect in one way or another serotonin, norepinephrine, epinephrine, dopamine, all these neurotransmitters. Well, if you have a drug that makes more of that available, and then the prescriber doesn't know that this person is on an MAOI inhibitor, which they're getting from these ground down seed roots, well, then you take something that, it's like a multiplier effect, and it can become very dangerous, and you can get like the serotonin syndrome. But you can also have really bad blood pressure spikes to the point where you can have strokes and throw off clots. So, to kind of show like an example of how just ridiculously powerful the drug interactions can be with these monoamine oxidase inhibitors, you even have to be careful. You're not supposed to eat foods that are high in tyramine. And foods that are high in tyramine are like aged foods, like aged meats and cheeses. And normally a person wouldn't think twice about eating, aged cheese, but if you're on these medications, they're so powerful that you have to, because like the tyramine in those aged foods can make your body release a little bit more norepinephrine than it normally does. And because these drugs are so powerful, the epinephrine that is released from that food can actually lead to these huge blood pressure spikes, because then it doesn't get broke down because you have these monoamine oxidase inhibitor substances in your bloodstream. So, like, and this stuff can be really dangerous. Like, let's say with COVID going on, if somebody went into, shock, or, they went into an emergency room and they wanted to get their blood pressure was low from COVID, or from anything else for that matter.
Yeah.
And they didn't know the person was on this MAOI inhibitor, basically you could end up giving them a pressor agent, whether it be epinephrine or something else, adrenaline or something else, to get their blood pressure up. Well, you have this massive multiplier effect. So you give them a milligram of epinephrine or something, and it's like giving them several milligrams, and you could like fry them out. I mean, you can, fry their kidneys out. You could basically make them lose use of their digits, because the blood flow gets so constricted that they don't get enough blood to their digits. I mean, it's really dangerous stuff. And I think it's just kind of dangerous to put this information out there when you don't have an understanding of it. And I think it's irresponsible. Like, if you're a licensed psychologist that is treating people, I mean, first you should do no harm, right? I mean, that's with any healthcare practitioner. And I mean, just kind of understanding the limits of your knowledge, I mean, just kind of goes without saying. I don't know if you want to further talk about that at all, but we just kind of wanted to put this information out there first. And maybe we'll just end this show with that discussion, and then we'll go in and discuss the other information in these videos with him. But we think it's important as a precursor to put this information out there, so when people are listening to his other ideas and thoughts, they kind of,
as you were talking,
they kind of have an understanding of the degree of rigor that he puts into the information that he puts out in the world.
And I would also say that there's probably no medical alert bracelets for people who are self-medicating on what they think of the pharmacological performance of their substance.
Right.
You would, if you were an EMT and you came to the aid of someone who was self-medicating according to an unprofessional set of instructions, you wouldn't know that.
Right, exactly.
All you'd know would be that,
wow, we gave him a little bit, and it looks like we gave him a ton.
Yeah. Well, do you think this is a good? I can get back to Carl Jung a lot more in our next show, but
Yeah, I think it might be good just to split it up and then leave us more time for the next show to discuss the actual content on the synchronicity. And we
yeah,
just kind of felt it was important that because this kind of like rocked me back in my seat, and Phil, when we discussed it, we thought it was pretty concerning. So we thought at least we need to shine a light on it, almost like a public service announcement or something. But it unless you kind of are equipped with the knowledge to like understand that this stuff is bullshit,
yeah.
you could fall victim to information like
Yeah,
this.
our goal is to lift up the rock and see what's crawling under it.
Exactly. So what do you think? Should we sign off there,
Yeah, let's do
Phil?
our
And
sign
then
off.
the next one, let's do that.
Yeah.